what has happened at the UN, the resolution that was suggested by the United States, and Russia and China have decided not to veto the resolution. What's your take on the behavior of China and Russia?
Well, it's hugely disappointing, Nima. This resolution was, in a word, an atrocity. This is a resolution that was adopted in violation of international law. It is, I have argued, ultra vires. In other words, because it wasn't consistent with the requirements of international law, it was not in the Security Council's power to adopt many of the terms of this resolution. It was a proposal that was drafted by, Donald Trump and his cronies, put into a proposal for a Security Council resolution and effectively just adopted in toto by all 15 members of the Security Council, 13 of which voted in favor, and as you say, 2 of which, permanent members of the Council with veto power, declined to use their vetoes and merely abstained. And both Russia and China issued statements challenging the substance of the resolution. Both, I think, gave clear indications they don't intend to cooperate with what's in this resolution. But sadly, what they have done is to throw the Palestinians under the bus. Now, why, I think, is a question of speculation. However, what we know about this process is that the United States deployed every carrot and stick, every threat and inducement. I'm told by diplomats it was the most extreme case of pressure deployed by Washington against member states to cajole them into supporting this resolution, or at least not blocking it, that they had ever seen. And of course, there was a lot on the table, trade deals and tariffs. Now, Russia was in the middle of very sensitive negotiations with the Trump administration on Ukraine. And we see immediately after they consented not to veto this, this plan that was circulated, in which it appears that the Trump administration is accepting Russia's position on the retention of key territory gained in the war with Ukraine. China is engaged in sensitive negotiations on trade and tariffs and other related issues. And clearly there are transactional considerations there as well. But then there were other factors. What the Americans did effectively was to threaten, as I've said, to threaten that they would unleash the dogs of genocide completely again, that they would allow Israel, with full US support, to continue its assault on the Palestinian people. Now, obviously, the Israelis have never stopped their assault since this so-called US brokered ceasefire, which is not a ceasefire at all, was called. Israel has violated that ceasefire literally every day, murdering hundreds of Palestinians, destroying hundreds, now thousands of Palestinian civilian structures, blocking thousands of trucks from bringing in much needed food and medicine for the Palestinian people. And yet there is this pretense by the US government, by Western politicians, by Western corporate media, that there is a ceasefire in effect. There is no ceasefire in effect. There is no peace process. None of this is driven to actually achieve any kind of peace. And yet the threat by the US to completely unleash the unrestrained genocidal machine of the Israelis on Gaza was another factor in convincing some delegations to go along with this atrocious resolution in the Security Council. 2 other factors that I have to mention here, which is, the Palestinians in the UN are represented by the Permanent Mission of Palestine to the UN. That mission is under the direction of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. It's not supposed to be that way. You're supposed to have, the state of Palestine represented in the United Nations. You're supposed to have the PLO that's responsible for foreign policy. And then, the Palestinian Authority, whatever you think of it, is this local administration in Gaza, which has no real legitimacy. It has very, very low approval ratings or support from the Palestinian people. Its position, represents a very small minority of the Palestinian public, and yet it is the position to which member states of the UN will often defer. And the Palestinian Authority at the UN pressed delegations to support the US plan and the US resolution. And so, and that doesn't, get delegations off the hook, because as the Palestinian Authority, which they know doesn't have legitimacy inside of Palestine, was pressing them to support it, Palestinian society was appealing to the world to reject it. And so Palestinian civil society, the main human rights groups, the Palestinian NGO coordination mechanisms, all of the political factions, except that controlled by Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah, all of the resistance groups, they had all rejected it. And yet these states deferred to what the Palestinian Authority was saying in the UN. Finally, and I think this is a huge factor as well, is that the Arab countries, which, no surprise, many of them have long been aligned with the US and really complicit with the Israeli regime, they also were telling states that they wanted this to be supported. And so you had Egypt supporting it. And so when delegations would go to them and say, what should we do? Egypt, appealed on them to support the resolution. You had the Saudis. And remember, Egypt is the second largest recipient of US foreign aid after Israel. And that aid is entirely conditioned upon Israel serving as the southern security mechanism for the Israeli regime. So then you have Saudi Arabia, which, as you saw, right after this resolution was adopted, was in the middle of discussions with the United States, with Donald Trump, to provide security guarantees for the Saudi regime. And so Saudi, right after the vote, was declared a major non-NATO US ally, which means that the US would effectively guarantee its security, and was in the middle of negotiations with Washington for advanced US fighter jets to the regime, all of which was advanced then when Mohammed bin Sultan appeared in the White House 2 days later or so with Donald Trump, where he was lauded, as this great leader and was given everything on his checklist effectively. And so it was with the broader Arab group, all of which abandoned the Palestinian people, abandoned international law, and bowed down to the empire, much to the chagrin not just of Palestinian people concerned about their rights, but about people who follow international law and the Security Council and who see this as effectively a mafia dictate that is entirely inconsistent with requirements of international law and with the powers of the Council, but which is now a reality. They have created a Frankenstein monster, and none of the 15 members of the Council, neither P5 members, China and Russia, nor anyone else stopped it. And remember, 3 of the P5 members are the US, the UK, and France. The US, co-perpetrator in the genocide and effectively the proxy of Israel inside the Security Council. And the UK and France have both been entirely complicit in the genocide, and enthusiastically so. That leaves only China and Russia as a possible obstruction to this very nefarious plan. And both China and Russia stepped back, criticizing the resolution, but not blocking it.
And don't you think that in the eyes of Russians and Chinese, they really feel that this resolution would fall apart? That's why they don't need to go against it, because they want to show how the United States is incapable of implementing or being, producing something practical.
Yeah, and I think that is a correct assessment. This plan will fall apart. There are many key moments where it is very likely to come unraveled, beginning with trying to identify troops that are going to want to be associated with the Israeli regime and the US in attacking the Palestinian people and doing battle with their resistance and being complicit in what is a continuation of the genocide of what the International Court of Justice has called an unlawful occupation. So I think they're going to have a hard time identifying troops willing to do that. Now, they will probably fill the gap by other nefarious means. They'll identify some troops. They will use their CIA thugs. They will use these mercenaries, these military contractors that they tried to use to set up this fake Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to corral the Palestinians. Those mercenaries are still in the region waiting for their orders and fully expected to be a part of this. But they're going to have a very hard time in implementing this and sustaining it, and in, I think, sustaining the attacks that they've already begun to receive on this horrific resolution coming from all over the world. But before it comes entirely unraveled, they can do a lot of damage to the Palestinian people, to the people in Gaza, to the causes of international law. And they can do, I think, lasting damage. They have done, I think, lasting damage to the UN Security Council and its legitimacy because, think about it, Nima. The Security Council, this mechanism set up by the victors of the Second World War, that gave the five of them a very special status where they have veto power, which means they have absolute impunity. The Council, which is the only enforcement mechanism in the international system, in the UN system, is fully in their control, and so it can never be turned against them or their allies. Secondly, the Council has awesome both legislative and enforcement powers. It can deploy force to impose its will against the wishes of an indigenous population. And now you've got a council that has gone rogue. It's operating outside the bounds, the constraints of international law. The implications of that for Palestine are already becoming evident, but the implications for the rest of the world, and indeed for all of us, unless you live in a country that has veto power, should terrify everyone. And that damage is already being done. It's a very dangerous precedent that could be repeated over and over again to the cost of the human rights of people all around the world. I also think that a part of what China and Russia have done is transactional in the way that I have described it. They had concerns that they decided were more important than the freedom, the liberation, the human rights of the Palestinian people. They both have relationships with the Israeli regime around issues of trade and technology and security questions and so on, which I think is quite scandalous at this point. The International Court of Justice has said all of those relationships have to be cut off until Israel complies with international law that it is in which it is in breach. But there are other, I have no doubt, geostrategic considerations that came in, not least of which is to allow the U.S. to continue to spend its treasure on this bottomless pit of Israeli security consumption and to get itself locked into another failure, to distract its military and intelligence capacities, all in the realization that all of that will be, in the end, will be wasted, that it will be in vain. But it's a pretty high price to pay, I think, Nima, to sacrifice the rights of what has happened to the solidarity that we saw in the 1960s and 70s of peoples fighting for their liberation? What has happened to the willingness to stand up to the U.S. imperial regime? And it is behaving worse than an empire. It's behaving like a mafia in using, not just in Western Asia, but also in the Caribbean and beyond. And if the countries of the world don't come together with whatever power they have, including their collective power, but also the power of other major powers like Russia and China, to stand up, the empire only grows stronger and stronger. And this will not be the end of its acquisitive, voracious appetite for conquest around the world.